Thanks to the organizers of this such an important strategic dialogue conference, particularly Honorable Chancellor Ram Das Pai, Professor Arvind Kumar, Tomoko Kiyota-san. Thank you very much. I did my PhD in the area of India-Japan relations, and that's why I have to visited Japan quite a number of times, and during postdoctoral research as well. And I would be basically deliberating out of that research input, which I gathered in Japan by visiting several times. And let me begin by saying that, well, relations between India and Japan have gathered momentum since the last decade and a half, with the leadership of the two states making a concerted effort to deepen their engagement at various levels, political, economic, and strategic. This indicates a major shift, as rightly pointed out by Horimoto Sensei, in the pattern of India-Japan relations, given that the bilateral relationship had remained low profile for many decades. Now, unlike Japan's tumultuous past with its other Asian neighbors, there are no historical baggage of grievances in Japan's relations with India which would impede the evolution of bilateral ties. On the contrary, the relationship is marked by a positive historical legacy. The friendship, for instance, friendship between Tagore and Okakura Tenshin, the two great cultural ideologues, between Subhash Chandra Bose and Raj Bihari Bose's association with Japan, Indian Justice Pal's dissenting judgment in favor of Japan. All these historical ties have been catalytic in promoting and deepening the mutual appreciation and understanding between the populaces of the two countries, which is vital, to my mind, to sustain the ongoing India-Japan relations. Now, the fact that India and Japan do not have a conflictual past and share this positive historical legacy is perceived by the political elites in Japan and India as an important feature of the bilateral relations. This is indicated in the references that have been made to the aspect of the positive historical legacy in the various speeches and joint statements of the two states. In fact, Prime Minister Abe himself has emphasized on this element of positive historical legacy, which was markedly evident during his when he visited India during his first term as a prime minister in 2007. And Abe's agenda during that period included visits to the ancestral house of Subhash Chandra Bose in Kolkata, the house of the Indian Nobel laureate poet Rabindranath Tagore, and meeting with the son of the Indian Justice Radha Binod Pal. Now, the Indo-Japanese bonhomie in the early years of the post-war period was reflected in India's support which Japan received in the aftermath of the Second World War. In the immediate years of the post-war period, India was instrumental in bringing Japan into the mainstream of global and regional politics. India vociferously advocated Japan's rehabilitation in the Committee of Nations, especially its admission to the United Nations in 1956. India not only waived all war reparation claims against Japan, but also defreezed the Japanese assets in India. In the late 1950s, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and his Japanese counterpart, Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi, received huge welcome during their respective visits to Tokyo and New Delhi. India became the first recipient of Japanese ODA in 1958, and an important point to note here is that though there is a reservoir of popular sentiments between the two sides, a substantial political engagement could not, unfortunately, develop till the mid-1990s, as the political will to boost bilateral ties woefully lacked between the leadership of the two states due to the Cold War constraints. Now, the structural realities of international system during the Cold War era impeded the development of bilateral ties. As the noted American analyst on Japanese foreign policy, Edwin Roscher, has observed that whatever the mechanism for formulating foreign policy, the chief determinants are inevitably the actual international realities and the national perception of these. The national perception of the international realities during the Cold War years and the divergent foreign policy stances created a political distance between the two states. At the domestic level, India's closed-door economy till 1991, with controls and regulations of various sorts, did not offer incentives to the Japanese investors. India's sluggish economic growth rate under the outmoded socialist economic development model was in stark contrast to Japan's capitalist market economy model, and the two countries therefore found few economic complementarities during this period. Now, during this period, India was, in Japanese eyes, a developing country plagued with poverty and illiteracy, and India was almost excluded from Japan's Asia policy agenda. And this perception among the Japanese policymakers and the political elite in Japan lingered on even in the post-Cold War era till the beginning of the 21st century. This is evident from the fact that India, as well as the Indian subcontinent as a whole, rarely figured in the books and special issues of journals and magazines which focus on Japan's relations with Asia. For instance, a noted expert on Japan's foreign policy, Wolf Mendel's 1995 book entitled Japan's Asia Policy, did not include, it was published in 1995, did not include South Asia in it. It is only since the year 2000 that the Japanese newspapers like Nikkei Weekly have been reporting regularly on India. Now, in contrast to the Cold War structural factors, the contemporary international realities of the post-Cold War era are gradually drawing India and Japan closer. In this context, it needs to be mentioned that the Lucist policy, which New Delhi initiated in the early 1990s, was catalytic in drawing India close to Japan. In this connection, it is noteworthy that the then Finance Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, acknowledged that India's Lucist policy was not just the gateway to trade for the region, but a strategic shift in India's vision of the world as India sought greater engagement with the hitherto neglected Asia-Pacific nations. Now, it appears that during the second phase of the Lucist policy, India, apart from consolidating its relations with Southeast Asia, is looking beyond at the larger Asia-Pacific region. And Japan's robust economic engagement with the Southeast Asian and East Asian states in the post-Cold War era perhaps made the Indian foreign policymakers take note of the fact that one road to Tokyo lay via the Southeast Asian states. And India's efforts to improve its relations with the Southeast Asian nations seems to be a logical corollary to this realization. Now, at the regional level, as Horimoto Sensei rightly pointed out, one could perceive a growing political synergy between India and Japan. For instance, Japan's helping India into the East Asian community, and India's helping Japan to become an observer nation state in the SAARC. Now, the growing proximity of the political ties between India and Japan is also evident from the fact that the two states are in the process of developing adequate mechanisms for constant bilateral consultation, including the bilateral summit at the highest level, the prime ministerial level, which has become an annual event. Now, the change in Japan's perception vis-à-vis India's growing profile at the regional and the global level is markedly evident since the visit of Prime Minister Mori to India in the year 2000. And Mr. Mori declared with his Indian counterpart, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, that India and Japan are global partners. Now, it is interesting to note that why Japan for the first time used the term global partnership with respect to a nation other than the United States. Now, in course of my research interview with former Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori, Mr. Mori pointed out to me that his declaration of India as Japan's global partner was symbolic of Japan's recognition of India's growing profile in the global arena, and he also opined that declaring India as Japan's global partner demonstrated the drive of the Japanese political elite to increase Japan's diplomatic options in the post-Cold War era. Now, it is also an important indicator of the assertive foreign policy approach which Japan has started to exhibit in the post-Cold War international situation. Prime Minister Mori's visit was reciprocated by Vajpayee's visit in 2001, which was another important landmark in India-Japan relations, given that it helped to dissolve the virtual deadlock in the bilateral relations following the 1998 nuclear tests. And since the tests were conducted under Prime Minister Vajpayee's watch, which led to a rapid deterioration of the bilateral relations. Now, during his visit, Prime Minister Vajpayee reportedly stated that India and Japan together can change the face of Asia. This was the first time that an Indian Prime Minister made such a statement vis-à-vis Japan, which clearly indicated the growing importance of Japan in India's foreign policy calculus. Now, since the visit of Prime Minister Mori, all the Japanese Prime Ministers have made it a point to visit India. And it was Prime Minister Shinzo Abe who has been the most enthusiastic about the future of India-Japan relations. And in his address at the joint session of the Indian Parliament in 2007, Mr. Abe talked about a broader Asia consisting of Pacific and the Indian Ocean countries, such as Japan, India, Australia, and the US, that share common values of democracy, freedom, and respect for basic human rights. He argued for greater cooperation among these states. Now, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, in his book Utsukushi Kunie, or Toward a Beautiful Country, declares that relations strengthened with India is of crucial importance to Japan's national interest. The structural changes in the complex Asian strategic framework and the growing power disequilibrium followed by the rise of China have factored in Japan's renewed focus on redefining its relations with India. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was then the former Prime Minister in 2011 when I visited him during a research interview, he opined that the factors which has propelled Japan to develop close ties with India seems to be Japan's growing perception of India as a possible counterweight to future Chinese expansionism in the Asia-Pacific region. China is cultivating close ties with states which have maintained a rather antagonistic approach towards India and Japan. China seems to be engaged in a balancing game with India and Japan through its all-weather friend Pakistan and its military alliance with North Korea. China's strategy to play the North Korea card vis-à-vis Japan and the Pakistan card vis-à-vis India is a classic example of realist balancing behavior in the emerging Asian security architecture, to my mind. China realizes that it has thrived because it had devoted itself to the economic development while letting the United States police the region and the world. China's resurgence is altering the power balance across the Asia-Pacific region, and in the absence of effective regional institutions in the region is becoming as volatile as during the Cold War. So the China factor is inducing a major shift in the foreign policy approaches of India and Japan towards each other. Now, another underlying factor which is shaping Japan's perception vis-à-vis India is that India has been labeled by the CIA as the most important swing state, quote unquote, in international politics, predicting that by 2015, India would possess the fourth most capable concentration of power in the international system. If India is indeed a swing state in the international system, then it seems to have swung towards the United States, which is, of course, one of the factors behind Japan's keenness in cultivating close ties with India, and which is India's growing proximity with the United States. Now, apart from China, the United States has the biggest impact on the foreign policy of both India and Japan, and particularly the United States perceives its relations with India as central to maintaining a long-term stability in Asia and fighting terrorism. And Washington has been, over the years, encouraging New Delhi and Tokyo to come closer as it endeavors to maintain the strategic balance in Asia. For instance, in the common strategic objectives earmarked in the joint statement of the US-Japan Security Consultative Committee in 2011, both the US and Japan welcomed India as a strong and enduring Asia-Pacific partner. Prime Minister Abe seems to attach much importance to the US factor in India-Japan relations. In course of my research interview with Mr. Abe noted that Washington's efforts to rejuvenate India-US strategic partnership and put US relations with India on a more solid foundation helped bring about a change in Japan's perception of India as well. Mr. Abe viewed the pattern of relations among these three countries as being of crucial importance in the context of the emerging security architecture in Asia in the coming years. Now, as India expands its strategic outreach in the Asia-Pacific, its evolving relations with Japan are going to be of crucial importance. Now, the India-Japan relations has entered a new phase with Prime Minister Abe assuming the Premier's office for a second term. Prime Minister Abe categorically maintained that a strong India is in the best interest of Japan and a strong Japan is in the best interest of India. Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, on the other hand, has also noted that the time has come for India and Japan to build a strong contemporary relationship, one involving global and strategic partnership that will have a great significance for Asia and the world as a whole. Now, in the coming years, the convergence of national interests between India and Japan is likely to be based on some of the issues of mutual interests and concerns, which include preventing Asia from being dominated by one power. In other words, advancing the cause of Asian stability. While India and Japan would prefer a multipolar Asia, China is likely to favor a unipolar Asia in future. Once China emerges as the largest economy of the world may witness a different and more ambitious China wishing to run the world as per the Beijing consensus. India and Japan's national interests may converge to thwart such a possibility and to have a multipolar Asia. Hence, the shadow of China will continue to loom large over the future trajectory of India-Japan relations. However, having said that, neither Japan nor India would be too eager to form an open alliance against China. For instance, immediately after signing a declaration on security cooperation during the visit of the Indian Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh to Tokyo in 2008, both India and Japan sought to reassure China that their ties would not be at the cost of any third country, least of all China. Now, eliminating the threats posed, other important areas of convergence of interest in the future India-Japan relations would include arresting the further spread of weapons of mass destruction or WMDs, protecting the global commons, for instance, the sea lanes of communication, maintaining their freedom, and preserving energy security, given that energy security has become a critical driver of India and Japan's foreign policies. Because about 70% of India's energy and more than 80% of Japan's energy supplies are imported through the Indian Ocean from the Persian Gulf. And and in this context, let me also mention that both India and Japan are seriously focusing on maritime security cooperation with the aim of keeping the important sea lanes of communication free, or maintaining the freedom of these sea lanes of communication. Though India has its preeminent focus on keeping the sea lanes across the Indian Ocean free, but it has also exerted a considerable interest and influence in protecting the sea lanes along the South China Sea as well. But why South China Sea? Indian Ocean, we can understand the direct interest of India is involved. But South China Sea, what is India's interest? To my mind, the South China Sea, India's expanding trade relations with the Southeast Asian countries and India's maritime trade along these sea lanes of communication in the South China Sea is an area of important interest, preeminent interest with regard to India. And Beijing's recent declaration of conceiving South China Sea as a Beijing lake has sort of raised alarm with regard to both India and Japan. Now, after decades of political estrangement and missed opportunities, India and Japan are now exhibiting a strong political will to boost the bilateral relationship and give it an entirely new dimension. In a complete reversal of their Cold War attitudes, the two states are keen on expanding bilateral defense cooperation. The common politico-strategic interests and concerns have propelled Prime Minister Abe to conceive India and Japan as quote-unquote natural allies, and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to declare Japan as India's natural and indispensable partner. Given Abe's admiration for India and his urge to further strengthen India-Japan strategic and global partnership, the two states have a unique opportunity to develop a comprehensive engagement in the new Asian era. I would like to conclude my observation here. Thank you.